आप सभी सत्संगी भाई बहनों का यहाँ स्वागत है। स्वामी श्री प्रेमपुरी जी आश्रम ट्रस्ट आयोजित सद्गत श्री हरिलाल भगवान जी ड्रेसवाला स्मृति भक्ति संध्या में आज हम सब मिलकर डॉक्टर की विद्वत वाणी को यहाँ सुनेंगे और उसे अपने जीवन में अपनाने की कोशिश करेंगे। उनका जो विषय है एनलाइटमेंट एंड द ब्रेन, आज के युग के अनुरूप जिसकी ज़रूरत है वही विषय पर आज डॉक्टर और ज़्यादा प्रकाश डालेंगे। इस कार्यक्रम का आगे का दौर अमीश भाई संभालने वाले हैं।
डियर नटू भाई बदेका, सोमदत्त जी, it gives me a great pleasure that today we are celebrating the death anniversary of my grandfather, Shri Harilal Bhagwan Ji Dreswala, who was the pioneer of Prempuri Ashram and many other institutes like this one. And it gives me an immense pleasure that a family member, Dr. Shantanu Nagarkatti ji, will preside over this function and enlighten us with his divine words, which we have been listening since many years in Prempuri. But on this occasion, to listen to Doctor will be a new experience for us, because he's got something new every time for each of us. And I think so today also will be one of them. Now I would like to call my daughter Bhakti to speak a few words on her great grandfather.
Hari Om. Om Shri Paramatmane Namaha. Atha Dvadashodhyayah Bhakti Yogaha. यो नरिष्यति न द्वेष्टि न शोचति न कांक्षति शुभाशुभपरित्यागी भक्तिमान यस्मे प्रियः. This means he who neither rejoices nor hates nor grieves nor desires, renouncing good and evil, full of devotion, is dear to me. Hari Om. Hare Krishna. You all must be doing prayers every day, and we call that Bhakti. Yes, I am Bhakti. Bapuji, my great-grandfather, as you all know, was the pioneer and managing trustee of Prempuri Ashram and Ratambara Vishwa Vidyapit in Juhu, Mumbai, and Saputara in Gujarat. I have never seen my Bapuji, as I was born on 10th February 2002. That is exactly 10 days after my Bapuji left us. And I feel that Krishna has sent me on earth to fill the void for my family that was created after my Bapuji's demise. I have always heard of Bapuji's greatness from lots of instances which have been told to me by my family members. He, a person who could not ask even for a glass of water due to a paralytic attack, could sing this bhajan, Hari Bol. This clearly shows that Bapuji was a divine soul. I have also heard that on the day when Bapuji passed away, my brother Manas had won his first gold medal in sports. Dr. Shantanu Nagarkatti and Babiji had come to see Bapuji, and we had arranged for a cake, as 31st January is their wedding anniversary too. Dr. blessed Bapuji one last time before he left his soul. This is another miracle. There are lots of occurrences like these which I have heard from many people. I am proud to say that I am a great-granddaughter of Shri Harilal Bhagwan Ji Dreswala. I love you, Bapuji. We all have gathered today to celebrate the death anniversary of my Bapuji for which Dr. Nagarkatti will give us a lecture on the subject Enlightenment and the Brain. I would like my brother Manas to come forward and throw a light on Dr. Shantanu Nagarkatti's achievements and his relation with our family. Thank you.
You all might be thinking, what medal am I wearing? Let me tell you, this medal I had won on 31st January 2002. It was the last time my Bapuji bestowed his blessings on me. My grandfather told me yesterday that I had to give a speech today. I was shocked and I wasn't prepared for it. But with the help of my father and my grandfather, I have prepared this small speech. If I have to talk about Dr. Nagarkatti, I will go on and on and on, and there will be no end to it. He is the most versatile person I have ever met. Dr. Shantanu Uddhav Nagarkatti was born on April 22nd, 1955 in a family with pious Brahmanical traditions. He was exposed to both Bhagavad Gita lectures and surgical operations from the age of 5. Dr. Nagarkatti, a surgeon by profession, well known and regarded for both his surgical precision and insightful spiritual teachings. In an endeavor to pave the way for experiencing marital bliss, Dr. Nagarkatti has seamlessly woven the notion of putting in efforts to make a relationship work to making relationships work effortlessly. Dr. Nagarkatti has been an honorary assistant professor of surgery at the Grand Medical College. Today, he conducts a unique practice in major ambulatory surgery in South Mumbai. He has also written regular feature articles on medical and health related issues. As a healer, Dr. Nagarkatti has a burning interest in the relief of human suffering. This initiated him into a deep study of psychology, philosophy, religion, and spirituality. He believes in the philosophy that one who pursues materialism alone goes into great darkness. One who pursues spirituality alone goes into even greater darkness. Yet one who pursues materialism and spiritualism side by side, like the two wings of a bird, is happy in this world and next. Isho Upanishad. For the last many years, Dr. Nagarkatti has committed himself to teaching and living the message of Bhagavad Gita while striving for excellence in his profession. Using the best techniques in modern science and ancient spirituality, Dr. Nagarkatti frequently convenes courses on comprehensive stress management. He is currently involved in exploring neuro-linguistic psychology with mantras and slokas for religious ecstasy and spiritual awakening. Dr. Nagarkatti is one of the pioneers in setting up Divya Path Yuva Sanskar Shakti in Prempuri Ashram. He has been giving lectures on Bhagavad Gita every Thursday since the past 20 years. Dr. Nagarkatti has helped encourage hundreds of satsangis like us to adapt the teachings of Bhagavad Gita in our daily life and thus simplified our living in this materialistic world. Doctor is like a family member to us. He has always stood beside us, showing the right path, and always guided us if we required any help. According to saints, my Bapuji was a saint maker. He was a divine soul, and he had great respect for Dr. Nagarkatti. Of the many stories my grandfather told me about Bapuji, there is one peculiar one that is clearly etched in my memory. In his last years, Bapuji was very ill. My grandfather was discussing treatment methods with Dr. Nagarkatti. Doctor suggested that we should consult another surgeon for the critical surgery that Bapuji had to go through. On hearing this, Bapuji immediately refused and said that if someone had to operate on him, it would be Dr. Nagarkatti. He said that if something happened to him during the operation, he would be safe with Dr. Nagarkatti, as Bapuji always said that Dr. Nagarkatti's hands were as magical as Lord Krishna's hands. Doctor is an inspiration to all of us sitting here, that how can one live in this greedy world if Krishna is in your heart. This is the first time I am hearing Doctor's lecture, and I am very excited as I have heard a lot about him from my grandparents.
Today I am going to speak on neuroscience and enlightenment, or the brain enlightenment, whatever you want to call it. And before I begin, I would like to say that, of course, we are celebrating, as he said, the death anniversary of Haribhai Dreswala. But I want to say that Haribhai Dreswala is not dead. He is eternal. I remember when I was in Prempuri ashram in this very hall, there was one elderly gentleman who sat next to Haribhai, and he leaned over to Haribhai. I was sitting behind, and he told Haribhai that, you know, now I am 80 years old, so I am feeling my age. How are you? How old are you? So Haribhai looked at him and said, you are 80 years old. I am eternal. So that fellow got a big shock that he was told that you may be 80 years old, but I am eternal. So I am just repeating what he said, that Haribhai is eternal. So of course he cannot be one who has experienced death. So today I am speaking on the subject of neuroscience and enlightenment. And what is happening is that philosophy, the study of science, as well as religion and philosophy, all overlap when we talk about the mind, the brain, and consciousness. This is something very unique that has happened, because in the last 20 years, there has been tremendous exponential growth in imaging of the brain. And as imaging of the brain has become more sophisticated and advanced, we find that we are learning more and more not just about the structure of the brain, we are also learning about the function of the brain. Just to give you an example, they are now using imaging of the brain in what is called neuromarketing. So they're able to design advertisements, they're able to design displays, and then watch the brains of people who see them and decide which will be the most attractive. Similarly, criminals are now routinely in many places have their brain scanned. Because when they scan their brain, they can make out whether that criminal is telling the truth or is an innocent man who's, whether it's a criminal has been telling a lie or whether it's an innocent man who's telling the truth. And all this can be observed by watching the brain, the functions of the brain. In fact, there are some places where they are studying the use of brain imaging to even decide who to hire for what kind of job. Because by watching how the brain functions and what is the natural thinking process of that person, they can decide whether that person is suited for that kind of job or not. So it's only natural that over a period of time, especially over the last 20 years, and more so perhaps in the last 5 or 7 years, they have intensively looked at people who have spiritual experience, people who are enlightened, people who are engaged in meditation, and seeing what happens to their brain when they are experiencing Advaita or oneness with the universe. What happens to their brain when they can rise above heat and cold, joy and sorrow, honor and dishonor. So they are able to see how the sage, how the person who has evolved in his functionality of the brain and his human behavior to be called a saint, what exactly happens to the brain when he is doing that. And so while something may be happening on the spiritual platform, we also have a mirror of what is happening in the brain on the material platform. And because we can see spiritual behavior and material function of the brain, we are now able to understand what really goes on. Small organ, you can carry it in your hand. And although it's a very small jelly-like organ that you carry in your hands, it may not be weighing much more than 1.5 kilos or maximum. This brain really consumes 20% of your blood supply. You have such a huge body and you have such a small brain, I mean relative to the body, and the heart which is pumping blood is pumping blood to the muscles of the back, the chest, the thighs, which require, of course, a lot of blood. But this tiny little organ is consuming almost 20% or 1/5 of the blood supply. Also, the nutrition of the brain is very different from the nutrition of the body. Incidentally, the natural nutrition of the body is fat, but the nutrition of the brain is sugar. My colleague or a friend of mine who is a diabetologist has done a lot of study on what happens to people who stop sugar altogether. For example, if someone is a diabetic, you might think that the best thing to do is to stop all sugar altogether. But when you stop sugar 100% and don't take any sugar, he has demonstrated that there are certain infarcts or part of the brain, especially dealing with memory, begins to die. So sugar is really the food of the brain. And how does the brain work? The brain functions through largely your unconscious mind. You may think that you are performing actions that are conscious. You may think that you are performing conscious actions that are volitional. You may think that you are making intelligent decisions. But most of the time, we are functioning on the level of the unconscious mind, which is the result of all the karmas and sanskaras that we have accumulated over a lifetime. I always used to, in my early days, I always used to wonder how to explain this verse from the Bhagavad Gita. Prakriti kriyamanani gune karmani sarvashah ahankara vimudatma kartaham iti manyate. It says that Prakriti is doing everything, but the foolish living entity, he imagines he is the doer. Elsewhere, he goes on to say, Karya karanam kartritve hetur prakriti uchyate purusha sukha dukhanam bhoktritva hetur uchyate. That Prakriti is doing all the actions, but the living entity, he is enjoying and he is suffering, thinking that he is doing all those actions. Now, with the study of neuroscience, the answer came to me. And the answer really is that Prakriti means your unconscious mind where your consciousness is not influencing it. It functions on its own. It functions automatically. Some of you may have realized that when you're driving the car and you have to stop at one or other place, while you're driving, your mind is on something else, but automatically you keep driving on your normal route to your work or your home, and then say, oh, I have to go back there. So who was driving all that time? You were driving? Apparently you were driving, but the actual person who was driving was your unconscious mind, that is your Prakriti. And your unconscious mind of Prakriti performs most of your actions, and most of the actions are stored in neural circuits in your brain. I'll explain to you why the human brain is structured like that and why we act in this manner. This is an interesting book by a person who's really examined how the mind works and about thinking. You can see this is the book written by him called The Mechanism of the Mind by Edward de Bono. In that he defines what the mind is. So if your brain is the hardware, your mind is the software. And this is how the mind is defined. The mind is a pattern-seeking, self-organizing system. Which means that your brain is constantly looking for patterns. Then you say, now I understood, it's just like that. Now I understand, it's just like this which I had in the past. And the minute you say, now I recognize it, then you stop thinking. So the purpose of the mind is to look for a pattern in behavior or look for a pattern in something that's happening and then say, oh, it is just like that. So the brain is not very brilliant in intellectualizing, but it is superb in recognizing patterns of behavior. So its primary job is to seek patterns, and if it finds something new, then it will store that new thing to be recognized again in the future when it finds a similar pattern. And the primary function of the mind is to figure out how to stop thinking. Now I'm going to explain to you why this is so. For example, when you go home, you may want to take off your shirt. So when you take off your shirt, you have to decide, shall I unbutton from the top or shall I unbutton from the bottom? Shall I unbutton from the middle? Shall I unbutton second button first? Which one shall I do? Shall I remove the cuffs and then I shall start on these buttons, or I'll finish the buttons and then I'll start on the cuffs? And then when I take off, shall I take my right hand out of the sleeve or shall I take my left hand out of the sleeve? Or shall I just pull it over my head? How shall I do it? So if you had to make a decision like that every day for every action that you perform, you would go mad. Your brain would get fried. Your brain would simply burn out. Because the brain cannot bear the strain of so much thinking. In fact, even with the little bit of thinking that it does, it consumes 1/5 of your blood supply. So if it were to start thinking for every small thing, shall I put my left slipper on first or shall I put my right slipper on first? If you had to keep on thinking and making a decision for everything, you would really suffer burnout. Therefore, what your brain does is, your brain recognizes certain patterns and automatically you will do all these activities without thinking. As I told you, even when you drive your car, you drive the car without thinking, and you are driving on your normal routine path, you forget that there's something new that you have to do today because your unconscious mind is taking you and the conscious mind is relaxed. So the conscious mind is a source of strain, the unconscious mind is a source of relaxation. And those who can function at the unconscious level for most of their activities, they are relatively at peace even during their work and their normal day-to-day actions. So what really happens is these patterns of behavior are stored in the brain in the form of circuits. So it's a circuit that is formed in the brain, and each time you use that circuit becomes strengthened. And that circuit in the brain stores the pattern of behavior. And we function through neural networks that exist within the brain. So pain we recognize through another network, pleasure we recognize through another network. We are automatically driven towards pleasure and we are automatically driven away by pain. So this is how we function within the world. Most of our actions are automatic. Most of our speech is automatic. Most of our behavior is also a function of all patterns that has been stored. Now, how are those patterns stored? Those patterns are stored by your previous actions. So, if you are doing an action again and again and again and again, what really happens is that thing becomes internalized inside of you. And when it becomes internalized inside of you, you become an expert at that. There are many examples for example, in Malcolm Gladwell's Outliers. I've spoken about this in another talk. The Beatles were a horrible beat group, horrible musicians. No one in their town of Liverpool allowed them to play at any hotel. So these people went to Hamburg. They crossed the English Channel, went to Hamburg. And they worked 16, 18 hours every day with only 10 minutes break for food, playing as a band. At the end of 3 years, when they finished what he calls as the 10,000 hours, it's called the 10,000 hour rule, that when he finished 10,000 hours of playing, all the music was written in their heads. And they came back to UK and they became the Beatles. There are many examples, many examples like that. I'm sure all of you in your own profession will have realized that when you're doing something again and again and again and again for a long time, it becomes automatic to you. Without realizing it, you can do it. And you can do it perfectly because you have crossed the 10,000 hour rule. I remember when the Bluetooth first came in, I got a Bluetooth for my ear from my cell phone. And it would automatically answer all my cell calls. So I used to wear it while I was operating. Because having crossed 10,000 hours, I was able to operate entirely had reached that level of automaticity whereby I could operate without being concerned and having my full attention. So one day one patient phoned me up and I was operating. So I said, yes. So he said, I'm having this problem, I'm having that problem, I'm having this problem, I'm having that problem. So I answered all his questions. So when I answered all his questions, he said, oh doctor, I hope I'm not disturbing you. So I said, you're not disturbing me, I'm only operating. So he said, how can you be talking to me when you're operating? I said, no, I have this Bluetooth and I can talk even with my mask over my face and I can talk. So he was shocked. He says, you are operating and talking to me at the same time? I am never going to get operated by you. Because you are not somebody who's paying attention to what you're doing. So I couldn't give him this lecture on the phone and explain to him that this 10,000 hours enables you to do that. So anyway, in case anyone listening to this is thinking of becoming my patient, I should tell you I've stopped using Bluetooth now. So it was Dr. Benjamin Libet, a neuroscientist, who demonstrated to us that we function at the unconscious level. And I've discussed this in another talk on work, but I will still go over it briefly. So what they did was, he put an EEG machine on the brain, he put an EMG machine on the hand, on the wrist, and please put your hands forward like this. Yeah. Now move your hand like this, whenever you feel like. Don't wait for anyone else, just do it whenever you feel like. So that's what he made them do. And here, there was a television set on which numbers were being placed from 1 to 1000. And he told him that whenever you decide, when you make a decision, when you have the will to move the hand, that time you say this is the number that you recall. Whereas the EEG was measuring when the brain, the motor part of the brain, decided to move his hand. And of course, the EMG was measuring when the hand started to move. And very simply, Benjamin Libet found that the brain decides to do something before you decide. That means the hand is like this. The brain has decided now to move the hand. And within 6 milliseconds of the brain deciding to move the hand, you say, okay, now I'm moving my hand, and you move it. So what happens is that the brain is functioning before your willpower tells you to do something. So remember this. Next time you reach for that chocolate cake, that extra piece of chocolate cake, next time you reach for that extra gulab jamun, and so on and so forth, whenever you are tempted and you are reaching for it, remember your brain has decided before you have decided. So between your decision and between the brain which decides before, there's a gap of 6 milliseconds, which is what he found out. But now with the use of neuroimaging techniques, we have demonstrated that it is not 6 milliseconds. Between the time Prakriti decides to move the hand, based on the patterns that are already stored in your brain, based on your karmas and your sanskaras, and when you decide to move your hand, there is a gap of not 6 milliseconds, but 6 to 8 seconds. Because now we can study the brain rather than with a crude instrument like EEG, we can actually see the function of the brain, and we can see that the brain decides to move the hand roughly 6 to 8 seconds before you decide to do it. So in fact, according to this, you have no willpower. You have no willpower. Most of your actions which originate, they originate from the seeds that are in your mind. So the seeds that are in your mind, your vasanas, your sanskaras, your karmic patterns that have been stored in your head, your thoughts, speech, habit, behaviors, patterns, all of them determine how you behave. And between that action and between your saying, yes, I will do it, there is 6 seconds. Now, amazingly, what do those 6 seconds exist for? Those 6 seconds mean that even if you don't have a willpower, you have a won't power. not a will power, but you have a won't power. Instead of saying I will do it, which happens naturally from your brain, you have the ability to say I won't do it. So whether it's a cigarette you're reaching for, whether it's a drink you're reaching for, whether it's an extra slice of chocolate cake you're reaching for, you have that 6 to 8 seconds which allows you to say I won't do it. So this is a won't power. Further, while you cannot determine most of your actions which are in fact done by Prakriti, you can program your Prakriti. So if you want to develop new habits, you will have to keep on doing those new habits again and again and again and again until it becomes a new pattern stored in your head, and then you are able to do it. Just to give you an example, when Osama bin Laden was attacked and killed, do you think that SEAL team just went blindly into that place? They didn't do that. Some of you have seen the movie Zero Dark 30. Who has seen Zero Dark 30? Yeah. So those of you who've seen Zero Dark 30 will know that they trained on an identical mock-up of Osama bin Laden's house, and they trained in that house again and again and again and again to create those patterns of behavior. And when they landed inside, they went in as automatons. And what do you know, when they saw his head, without thinking they shot his head off. Because everything was stored and created and stored in a pattern. So it doesn't mean that you have to be fatalistic, that everything is going to happen, will happen. It depends on your decision to reprogram your mind. So you can see here that the unconscious cause of thought causes thought and an apparent effect, your decision. But here the unconscious cause of action has a direct effect. And the difference between this and this occurring is about 6 to 8 seconds. So that gives you enough time to stop it. So while most of your actions are the result of past actions, you can create fresh patterns. So it is your purusharth and your prarabdha. So your purusharth can overcome your prarabdha. So your prarabdha may be the patterns of the past, but your purusharth can make a difference. As one saint, I overheard him saying, he says, you know what is the difference between purusharth and prarabdha? What is your height? Your height is your prarabdha. Your waistline is your purusharth. So here you have the conscious self and you have unconscious matter. The conscious self is the mahut who thinks he is telling the elephant what to do, but the elephant is doing most of the work by himself automatically. So sometimes the elephant or the unconscious mind overrides all the decisions of the conscious mind. This is 31st January, so it's not too late. Many of you must have taken New Year resolutions on 1st January, right? So you can understand how you have broken those resolutions, because you haven't broken them. Prakriti has broken them. Your past patterns have overcome all your decisions to exercise, eat less, whatever decisions you made are broken by the unconscious mind. To understand the brain, we must understand how the brain evolved. And there's a scientist by the name of Paul MacLean who introduced this idea of what is called the triune brain. In this triune brain, he explained that the reptile has a brain of only this size. The animals have a limbic system. So if you have a snake, the snake will have only that reptilian brain. If you have an animal, the animal will have the limbic system. And it's only when you come to a full-fledged human being that you develop the neocortex. Now, this is very important because since you have all three, you have the ability to function at the neocortex, you have the ability to function at the animal brain, human brain, animal brain, and reptilian brain. You can make a choice at which level you act. In one way, it is very much like what Bhagavad Gita says, that you have tamoguni, rajaguni, and sattvaguni. So the tamoguni behaves or acts from the reptilian brain, the rajaguni acts from the limbic system, and the sattvaguni acts from the neocortex. Whereas one who transcends even the neocortex, and we will understand how that is done, or uses it at will, such a person is considered by people to be enlightened. So, the reptilian brain essentially deals with survival. And even human beings, when they are struggling for survival, all their thinking takes place at this level. So, whether you are firing an employee or a domestic staff or anybody, when he's thinking of survival, he's thinking only from that brain, reptilian brain. Most people stop functioning at the limbic system. And why do they stop functioning at the limbic system? Because the limbic system is about emotions. It is about connecting with other human beings. It is about forming family and community. It is about loving one another and also getting angry with one another. So lust, anger, greed, envy, illusion, all of them occur at the limbic system. Madness, of course, occurs purely at the reptilian level. When you move to the neocortex, when you move to the human part of the brain, such a person has transcended emotion. Such a person has transcended emotions. And we will go to see that a person who has evolved to the level of enlightenment is able to use the signals of his brain to suppress his emotion. In the Bhagavad Gita, 2nd chapter, Krishna is explaining who is the sage of steady wisdom. Dukheshu anudvignamana sukheshu vigata spriha vita raga bhaya krodha stitidi muni uchyate. One who is not depressed when there's cause for sorrow, one who is not excited when there's cause for joy, one who is free from attachment, fear and anger, such is the sage of steady wisdom. So you can see that the sage of steady wisdom has suppressed his reptilian brain, has completely anesthetized his limbic system, and is functioning purely at the human level. So he is functioning at what we call as the neocortex. There are many verses that run through the Bhagavad Gita which constantly describe the enlightened one. In the 6th chapter we have a verse which says, Jitatmana prashantasya parmatma samahitah sitoshana sukha dukheshu tatha manapmanayo. For one who has conquered his mind, for him God is already reached. For him heat, cold, joy, sorrow, honor, dishonor, they're all the same. How? Because he has trained his neocortex, the human brain, to suppress animal emotion. And because he has suppressed animal emotion, he has conquered his mind. Therefore, for him, heat, cold, joy, sorrow, honor, dishonor, he is able to tolerate it with samatva. In fact, in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, Samatvam yoga uchyate. That one who has attained equanimity of mind, he has attained to yoga. He is said to be enlightened. So, I'm giving you this idea of the reptilian brain, the limbic system, the neocortex, to help you to realize that all these three are within us. In Bhagavad Gita also Krishna says, in everybody there is Rajagun, in everybody there is Tamagun, in everybody there is Sattvagun, and all these gunas are fighting with each other to see which becomes the most dominant. So within you there is the neocortex, within you there is a limbic system, within you there is a reptilian system, and depending upon the circumstances, each aspect of this brain is struggling to overcome the others. The natural inclination is always to go towards the lower, because survival is the highest motive of all. For evolution, survival is the highest motive. So the tendency is to go towards the lowest part of the brain, to go towards survival. It takes training to bring it up to the animal brain, to bring it to the level of emotion. And it takes even more spiritual training to learn how to suppress the limbic system or the emotions that lie within us. Now, by suppressing emotions that lie within us, I mean you are able to choose the emotions that you need to use for each occasion. So you are not a victim of your emotion. Your neocortex allows the expression of those emotions that it considers appropriate. This is just another slide which shows you the same thing. That the reptilian brain is the bottommost part of the human brain. The paleocortex or the limbic system is the animal part of the brain, and the neocortex is the human part of the brain. But you will be surprised how much people behave like animals. I mean, I've learnt more about human nature by studying my dog, late dog, than by studying human beings. So dogs have a territorial instinct. This is mine. Right? So they will bark at you if you come anywhere in their territory. Right? So eating, sleeping, mating, defending, guarding your territory, these are all very animal activities, and they're all programmed in your limbic system. And if you want to transcend those, you at least have to rise to human level. So the neocortex is about talking, thinking, creating, learning. It's from the human brain that we talk, think, create and learn. From the limbic system, we learn how to remember and how to interact with other people. And the reptilian brain is about how to survive, how to react, how to repeat and repeat and repeat. So in self-preservation, the reptilian brain seeks to strike or run away. It acts on the basis of fight or flight. It doesn't think. It's a very basic quality within the brain. So survival, self-preservation, fear, aggression, all of these come at the reptilian brain. And by survival, I don't necessarily mean survival in terms of threat to life. It may be a threat to your status, it may be a threat to your money, it may be a threat to your relationships, it may be, when you perceive it as threat, you act from reptilian brain. Similarly, the limbic system is all about interacting with other people. And it's all about normal activities that all animals engage in and human beings engage in. Most important of all, in the limbic system, there is a pair of structures at this point called the amygdala. Can you see that? Written in red. The amygdala is the trigger for the limbic system and the lower brain. And once that amygdala reacts, no one can stop it. It's called amygdala hijack. So if some situation occurs and your amygdala is hijacked, then higher thinking ceases. You're simply talking from the lower centers, the emotions and survival instinct. That's why whenever you want to talk about important matters, when you want to have a conversation where things are very touchy and emotional, then you need to make the atmosphere very safe. If you don't make the atmosphere safe, the people will never discuss the right thing. They will go straight to the lower brain and they'll think about survival. So whenever there is a touchy conversation, an important conversation, a conversation where people are sensitive and have different views, it's very important to prevent this amygdala hijack. Because once that amygdala hijack comes, the upper brain shuts down. And instead of acting coolly and calmly, you act in anger and you act in violence and you act in all kinds of animal ways. So the simple activities like eating, sleeping, mating, defending, they all occur at the level of the limbic system. The limbic system of the animal brain covers all these animal activities. And the higher activities are, or the neocortex is where the real human activities occur. So just to help you to realize where your brain is, or where the different lobes of your brain is, you can put your hands behind your head. So that's your occiput. You put it on your front of your head, that's your frontal lobe. If you put it here, it's your parietal lobe. And if you put it here, on your temples, it's your temporal lobe. Now all of them have an important role to play, because when we're talking about enlightenment, when you're talking about feeling oneness with the universe, each of these plays a special role. For example, when I talked about amygdala hijack, the frontal lobe, I'll show you later, develops and becomes more stronger or so-called muscular and more powerful through meditation. So your gray matter in your frontal lobe becomes thicker and stronger as a result of meditation. And this frontal lobe then has the power to suppress the amygdala. It has the ability to bring about limbic shutdown so that you can truly become a sthita prajna when your frontal lobe completely brings about suppression of the amygdala, which I pointed out earlier. And this is developed through the process of meditation and the thickening of the gray matter that is seen on radio imaging in the brain in the frontal lobes. Similarly, when you are feeling oneness with the universe, there are two areas in the parietal lobes, and these part of the parietal lobes tell you where your body is situated and how the room is situated with the body. And when you develop that ability to shut off function to those areas of the parietal lobes, you actually feel a loss of physical boundaries, a loss of the world around you, and you feel a true oneness with the universe. You're really situated in what we call as that state of complete oneness. So in short, let's look at it this way. If you are smart, you have to learn to suppress or control at least the old brain, and you have to learn to develop the new brain. So the new brain can be developed through satsang, through dhyan, through meditation. All these things create strength in the new brain. Whereas when you engage in animal activities, when you engage in survival activities, your lower brain is functioning and being activated all the time. So you have to learn how to recognize when the lower part of the brain is acting, when the animal brain acts, when the reptilian brain acts, and you should learn how to use your neocortex most of the time. So in fact, before you transcend the world, you must learn to transcend your lower brain. If you can't transcend your lower brain, you cannot transcend the world. If you cannot conquer yourself, how will you reach God? So to conquer yourself means to conquer the midbrain and the lower brain, the limbic system and the basal part of this brain. So we have the example of Raman Maharishi. And Raman Maharishi, as a young schoolboy, felt that he was having fever, and he had this fear that he was going to die. So when he was covered with fear that he was going to die, he decided that, well, if I have fear that I am going to die, how do I get rid of the fear? Let me act and pretend that I am dead. So Raman Maharishi lay on the floor as a schoolboy, and he said, now I am dead. So what is dead? His body is dead. His mind is dead. This person is dead. And through this process of neti, he came to the realization that truly we are nothing. Now we are going to understand how the brain comes to that conclusion. The brain, for the sake of evolution, for the sake of your survival and for the sake of your procreation, creates this illusion of a separate self. Merely for the sake of procreation and for the sake of survival, the brain creates a separate self or sense of self or ego, what we call as ahankar, as I, me and mine. And while it is useful to survive within the world, it becomes the cause of great stress when it is active all the time. The realization that this sense of self is an illusion created by the brain is the cause of enlightenment. And the persistence of this illusion that you are this I, me, myself illusion created by the brain is the cause of bondage. So, when you realize that you are nothing material, you are enlightened. When you think I am something, when you think I am somebody, you are trapped and you are bound. So in this world, everyone is trying to be somebody. Right or wrong? In this world, everyone wants to be somebody. But we've got it all wrong. Actually, we should be nobody. Because the art of becoming enlightened is the art of seeking to be nobody. And I've already explained to you that most of the activity is not done by you. It is done by your unconscious mind. So in fact, you are doing nothing. So when are you enlightened? When you realize you are nobody who does nothing. And that's what we are going to study to understand how the brain works and how you can work towards a nobody, towards becoming a nobody who does nothing. So as I said, the brain proved to be a mystery for thousands and millions of years. And then we began to see brain function. So we started using positron emission tomographies, we started using SPECT scans, we started doing all kinds of functional radio imaging where we could see that radioactive glucose, where it is taken up by the brain, where those red areas are seen, and which parts of the brain are not functioning actively or which are silent, which are dark and not colored. And of course, we already had an idea by seeing people who had brain damage and who had tumors, exactly where different parts of the brain functions exist. And we learned that the parietal lobe, as I told you, gives you an orientation of your physical body, and extinguishing the function of that part of your parietal lobe, your orientation association area, as seen over there, enables you to feel oneness with the universe. You feel that you have become Brahm. Because your body boundaries do not exist and the room does not exist. Similarly, the attention association areas, when they are strengthened and when they become more powerful through constant use, they are able to suppress the amygdala and to bring about a shutdown of the limbic system that lies underneath. The temporal lobe, when it experiences electrical activity like an electrical storm, it produces visions. And many prophets have had this experience of having visions where their consciousness shuts down, they see all kinds of holy figures, they see angels, they see all kinds of... This is the result of electrical activity in the temporal lobe. And now it is possible to replicate it by using what is called the God helmet. The God helmet is a helmet which has got a solenoid built into it, electrical wires built in a magnetic way around it. So when you wear it, you can actually feel that you are in the presence of somebody. And when this magnetism affects a house and people go into that house, they feel, ye to bhoot bangla hai. Why do they say it's a bhoot bangla and everyone says it's a bhoot bangla? Because the magnetic forces around impress upon that temporal lobe and they give you that impression that, there is somebody here. So also when that magnetic force is powerful and there's a whole crowd of people, you may all see the same vision. You may all experience a similar vision. That, somebody has come, somebody is standing on the wall there, somebody is standing on the roof. Because of the magnetic forces that affect your temporal lobe. So, we'll go a little more into it as we go on. We'll discuss after the... Now, naturally, when you are studying the human brain and you are seeing the functions of the brain, they started using monks. They used Tibetan monks. They used Franciscan friars, Christian monks. They used Sikhs who were meditating. And they put them into this radio imaging site. And some of these are very beautifully described, that they were scanned when they were going into meditative states, when they experienced one with the universe. That's unique, that's very unique. It doesn't matter what is the religion. One may be a Tibetan, one may be a Christian, one may be a Tibetan, one may be a Christian, one may be a Sikh, and one may be a Hindu, but all of them in meditation all experience oneness with the universe. And all of them have the same brain scan of its function. And both in all these people, you can see the baseline scan and the prayer scan. And you can see which parts of the brain become active when there is meditation going on. So you can see in the parietal lobe, in certain parts, where it becomes, say for example here, there's a lot of function. And here you can see that function has ceased. So what happens, as I said, one side of the parietal lobe tells you how your body is situated. The other part of the parietal lobe tells you how you are in relationship with this room. And when both of these become extinguished, the function becomes extinguished, you experience a oneness with the universe. If someone says that he is an advanced meditator, we can just check him out, put him in the machine. And when you put him in the machine, then you will see for yourself in black and white whether he is actually experiencing oneness with the universe or he is not. So this part of the brain had less blood flowing into them, and that led to that feeling of oneness, that so-called experience of Advaita. And those parts of the brain almost seem to be shutting down. So to give you an idea where that part of the brain is, you can see there orientation association area. So that orientation association area is the one where there is decrease in activity. And there is increase in activity in the prefrontal lobes. That's where I asked you to put your hand here. So that's your prefrontal lobes. They become strengthened through meditation, through focus, through jnana, through dhyan, through samadhi. That's what becomes strengthened. And the top part is where your orientation with the room and the rest of your body, it becomes attenuated, weaker, and stops functioning during the process of passive meditation. So there have been many articles and books on this, and many magazines have published. Newsweek, Time Magazine, Wired.com, many of these have published the findings of what happens to your brain when you are on guard. And when the parietal lobe shuts down, you can feel one with the universe. With response to religious lobes, where all the lobes join, they light up in response to religious words and mantras and chanting. Sacred images are seen in the temporal lobe, along with the religious emotions. The attention which results in all these activities is in the frontal lobe. So you can see how the brain scans of people lost in prayer or deep in meditation, regardless of religion, regardless of faith, regardless of philosophy, all of them had the same brain changes. All of them, when they were in deep prayer and meditation, had this response. So when you look inside the meditating brain, you can see what happens in the frontal lobe, which is the most evolved and which actually is the best developed in meditators. You can see what happens to the parietal lobe, as I have already explained to you. You can see the thalamus, which is the gatekeeper of the senses, right? That also stops functioning because you are not interested in what's happening in the world around you. As also the reticular formation, which is important for you to remain perfectly wide awake. Your sense of self, your ahankar, your separateness from the universe, your aham mam mameti, comes from the left side of your brain. And largely, I believe, it is in the left temporal lobe. Now, we are now going to listen to somebody who had a stroke. And with that stroke, there was bleeding and a clot in that part of the brain that deals with that sense of self. And when there was bleeding in that part of the brain that dealt with sense of self, that person became and experienced spirituality. That person felt everything is wonderful, I am in heaven, ooh la la, I have no boundaries. You will hear her speak herself. I'm going to show you the video clip. Right? And then she is operated. And that clot is removed. And when that clot is removed and she gains the function again, she says how wonderful it was to live in the right side of my brain. And why don't we all learn to live in the right side of the brain most of the time and move to the left side only when required? So when it's a matter of survival, when it's a matter of looking after yourself in the world, you move to the left side. Otherwise, you learn to live in the right side. It's much like you drive a car. You'd love to be in overdrive all the time. But if you have to climb uphill, you will move down to second gear, first gear, so on as required. So the left brain is required for first gear, second gear effort activities, whereas the right brain is required for relaxation and living and enjoying. Bliss lies when you shut down your left hemisphere, which deals with aham, mam, mameti, which deals with becoming a petty person in a small body with his own little thoughts of identity, emotional baggage. And when you move into the right hemisphere and you live there, you feel one with the universe. You feel that you're the life of the universe. You feel you're the power in the universe. So because of that, many atheists who have written books like The God Delusion and so on and so forth, began to say that there is no God. That it's all in the brain. God is in the brain. So why are you talking about God? Why are you worshipping God when God is all in the brain? But the answer and the truth is that there is something beyond the brain. First of all, as I said, your spiritual advancement is not your brain. It is your brain that reflects your spiritual evolution. And of course, you are something that lies beyond the brain. So this is Dr. Michael Sabum. And he is a cardiologist who was at the Emory University School of Medicine, incidentally where they treated the Ebola virus victims. And he, in the intensive care cardiac unit, conducted special interviews with patients who had experienced death that was clinically recorded and who were then revived. And he found that almost half of his patients who had died and were come back to life, even though they had no medical background, they were able to describe what happened to their bodies when they were clinically dead with their eyes shut. They could say, yes, this was the person who put a tube into my body. This was the person who put an injection into my heart. These were the people who put the electric shock paddle machines on my chest. That although they were supposed to be dead at that time, although their eyes were shut, although they had no medical background, at the time when they were considered to be dead, they were able to describe the entire event as if they had left their body and they were watching it from the outside. So this phenomenon of leaving the body, of coming out of your body, is a very profound experience. And this is also one of the meditative experiences you can have on getting up and leaving your body and going to the outside. So I know many people and who have succeeded in doing this, not that you should leave your body, but they have this ability to leave the body and experience it from the outside. Similarly, this is Dr. Ian Stevenson, who was the professor of parapsychology and the head of parapsychology in the University of Virginia. And he studied more than 800 cases of children who had experiences that could not be explained scientifically any other way other than showing that these children had been reborn. That he would go anywhere in the world and he would take that child to the place that she said she was born in. And that child would recognize the door, she would recognize her mother-in-law, she would recognize her sari from a bundle of the entire joint family saris. She would know secrets and she would tell her previous birth husband things that he could not have known unless she was his wife. And in fact, even there's one very nice film which I am not able to get. I even went to BBC in London and tried to get that video, but I was not able to get it. It's from a program called QED, which was shown on BBC long back, where they actually interview these children who have been reborn. And the child is explaining the previous life. And there are many characteristics about these things. Number one, it's a child who starts talking and starts talking about the previous life, but forgets about the previous life by the time the child is 5-6 years old. Usually there is a violent cause of death, and the birthmark on that child marks the site of violence with which the child died. This has nothing to do with past life regression, which is done with hypnosis. Because when you are hypnotized and you are told to start telling who you are, then in hypnosis you imagine the books you've read, the movies you've seen, the TV shows you've seen, and you make up your own character. So the so-called past life regressions are scientifically not accepted, although they may have some therapeutic value for emotional closure, but basically they are not scientifically accepted. But these are the scientifically accepted ones. So we don't have proof that everyone reincarnates, but we definitely have proof that there is a phenomenon known as reincarnation, which scientists call metempsychosis. I even went to meet Dr. Satwan Pasricha, who I think is still in the Nimhans Institute in Bangalore. And she gave me this book and she gave me many scientific papers she has published. She's a postdoctoral fellow who went to Virginia and worked with Dr. Ian Stevenson. And I even told her that one day I will bring you to Prempuri Ashram and you can talk to people about rebirth in case there are still some people who don't believe. And maybe we will do that someday. So, in the Bhagavad Gita it is very clear. Dehinosmin yatha dehe kaumaram yavanam jara tatha dehantara praptir dhiras tatra namuyate. From infancy to childhood to youth to maturity to middle age to old age, you are changing your body all the time. And at the time of death, you leave your body once again. So, God is not in the brain, God is all around us. We are not this body, and we are not this brain either. We are something that lies beyond the brain. Right? And we occupy this body during our lifetimes, and the body keeps changing. But at the time of death, we leave this body and move on to another body. And those who choose God, of course, they are not reborn again. They become one with the Supreme. So this was a very interesting book called The God Gene. And they found that some people are able to meditate more easily. They are able to go into trance more easily. And the gentleman who wrote this book, he identified a gene with which, if you have that gene, you will find it that much easier to go into meditative states, to go into altered states of consciousness. And many people came out and got very angry. And they said, God is democratic. He is equally available to everybody. So how can someone be gifted with a God gene? So I asked that gentleman. I had a debate with him. I said, do you believe in rebirth? He gave me a fancy thing. I said, no, tell me yes or no. You believe in rebirth or not? He said, yes, I believe in rebirth. I said, so if you are struggling to do something in this birth, do you not think that God, Prakriti, destiny will arrange for you a body which is more appropriate to doing what you've been struggling to do all your life? Like suppose you're overweight, but all the time you're doing everything to lose weight, dieting, running, getting bariatric surgery done, doing this. Do you think next time God will not give you a slim body? So then if you're struggling to meditate all the time, do you think God will not give you a gene which makes it easy for you to meditate? So that's it. So there is something called rebirth, and there is a gene that makes it easier for some people to meditate as opposed to other people. And God is perfectly fair. He gives you what you seek. If you don't seek, He'll not give it to you. And if you seek Him, He will come forward to you. So you can even change your brain. I mean, this is a very interesting thing. We have also learned this in the last 15-20 years, that there is something which is known as neuroplasticity, which means it doesn't matter what kind of brain you have, at the end we'll cover. We are able to change our brain. And the ability to change the brain is called neuroplasticity. And one who uses the brain for one thing will get skills in that thing, because the brain will adjust, and as I said, will create patterns and neural circuits that help you to function in one way. And somebody who does something else, his neural circuits will change and transform his brain in another way. As a matter of fact, as you grow old, some people become old and they have dementia. Other people remain alert no matter how old they become. It's very simple. If you use it, you can't lose it. But if you don't use it, you will definitely lose it. Therefore, to remain intellectually and mentally sharp, you should constantly do activities that utilize your brain every moment. We've also learned, as I told you, that meditation increases gray matter. So even if you don't have the God gene, if you start meditating, you can see the areas that light up. You will see that that part of the brain which can suppress your amygdala, which will give you greater control over your feelings, or even bring about complete limbic shutdown in order to make you a sthita prajna, is possible through your purushartha. So through your purushartha, which is through meditative processes, through jnana, dhyana, samadhi, you are able to develop that part of the brain which can prevent amygdala hijack, and it can develop to the extent you can bring about complete limbic shutdown and you can transcend all the emotions altogether. So this is another interesting book I have. It's called How God Changes Your Brain. It's written, I think, by Andrew Newberg. And he has actually performed experiments on people who have been doing the Sikh meditation called Simran. And he has seen how and demonstrated how the brain becomes altered through meditative techniques. So, God changes the brain, or rather thinking about God changes your brain. And of course, we have Dr. Michael Persinger, I spoke to you about earlier. He created this helmet. This helmet has got electrical wires which run around it enough to create an electromagnet. And by using this electromagnetic helmet, you can experience the presence of another. I explained about the Bhoot Bangla, I explained to you about a group of people seeing religious apparitions. They're all the result of the magnetic fields that have an influence on the brain. As a matter of fact, the effect of magnetic waves on the brain is very profound, that there is now a school of treatment called transcutaneous magnetic stimulation. And people who are suffering from depression or who are suffering from similar disorders can stop their medications if they are treated with this transmagnetic cranial stimulation available here in Bombay. And it is effectively very useful for people because they actually alter your brain by using magnetic signals. You know, I used to teach a course in mind and body medicine, and I experimented a lot with all kinds of electronic devices for creating altered states of consciousness. And these are mind machines with which I used to work using mantras, shlokas, etc. And of course, there is flotation tanks. Perhaps somebody I know is getting a flotation tank now. And you can float in that flotation tank. And it's a super saturated solution, it's soundproof. And it allows you to have the same feeling of gravitational weightlessness floating in water as if you are in your mother's womb. And floating in this way actually transforms your brain, and it makes you completely chilled out. It makes you absolutely shant. It makes you experience a very silent mind from spending as little as an hour or two in this machine. Not a machine actually, it's just a tank which contains hypersaturated Epsom salt. You also have Vibra lounge chairs. Like you can see in the seat itself, it's like a lazy boy, but it's got a seat with speakers built into it. The one you can see on the seat is a very large speaker, and they allow you to play sounds like Om through it. And that Om from the speakers which you're sitting on the chair, it vibrates through your body, and by vibrating through your body, it simply shatters all the thoughts you have, all the mental patterns that you have been developing, and it gives you a feeling of complete peace. So, my friends, meditate and be happy. Take good care of your brain, and your brain will take good care of you. And if you progress along the path of spiritual evolution, your brain will change along with you. Thank you very much.